In the heart of London, where the River Thames coiled like a silver snake around the ambitions of men, there lived a king in waiting whose life was a contradiction. He was Henry of Monmouth, Prince of Wales, and heir apparent to the shaky throne of England. To the common folk, he was merely Prince Hal, a figure of infamous notoriety, a frequenter of taverns in the disreputable Eastcheap district, carousing with highwaymen and rogues like the enormous charismatic Falstaff. This was not the image of a future sovereign. It was a scandal, a political embarrassment to his father, King Henry IV, a monarch who had seized the crown in a bloody coup, forever haunted by the shadow of regicide. The king, gaunt and perpetually ill, watched his son's antics with despair, convinced Hal cared more for wine and low company than the weight of the imperium. What the king and most of his court failed to grasp was the depth of the prince's education and the strategic nature of his misspent youth. Henry was no fool. He was fluent in French and Latin, a scholar of both military tactics and theological debate. His taverns were not just dens of vice, they were listening posts, places where the pulse of the common people could be felt, where loyalty was bought with laughter and a pint of ale rather than gold or titles. His reputation, in a strange, subversive way, shielded him. By being the wild prince, he was underestimated by his enemies at home and abroad.
The year was 1413. On a cold, late March morning, King Henry IV finally succumbed to his protracted illness. The scene was one of fraught Shakespearean drama. The dying king had famously demanded to know if the crown was safe, only to be answered by the newly reformed Prince Hal, "I placed it on my head, my liege. I shall keep it there." At 25, Henry V was King of England. The transition was instant and absolute. The tavern doors slammed shut, the dissolute companions were dismissed with pensions, a final severance from the past. A man who had seemingly mastered only revelry now revealed himself to be a statesman of astonishing clarity and focus. His first act was one of deliberate political genius. He had the body of the deposed Richard II, whose murder had stained his father's reign, reburied with solemn royal honors. The act was a declaration, a cleansing of the past, a stabilization of the present, and an affirmation that Henry V was a king whose legitimacy rested on God's will, not man's maneuvering. But stability was an illusion. The exchequer was near bankrupt. The kingdom was still fractured by the feuds of powerful nobles. And across the narrow, choppy waters of the English Channel lay the true prize, France. Second, the gauntlet throne, claim and conspiracy. The English claim to the French throne was a legacy issue, tracing back centuries, yet Henry V chose to press it with immediate, stunning audacity. He dispatched ambassadors to the court of the perpetually insane King Charles VI of France, demanding not just a few traditional French holdings, but the crown itself.
The French Dauphin, Prince Charles, dismissed Henry's demand with an infamous mocking gift, a chest of tennis balls. The implication was clear. The English king was a juvenile playboy, fit only for games, not for the serious business of war. The casus belli was secured. For Henry, the insult was a public challenge, a perfect rhetorical tool to galvanize a nation and raise the necessary war funds. He framed the conflict not as a grab for land, but as a divine mission to reclaim his rightful inheritance, which God himself would sanction. The preparations for the invasion were meticulous and unprecedented. Henry V was an administrator as much as a warrior. He personally oversaw the building of ships, the organization of supply lines, and the training of a new kind of army. Unlike his predecessors, he focused on the deadly potential of the English longbowmen. Each archer, a master craftsman with a deadly weapon, could lose 10 arrows a minute, transforming a peasant farmer into a force multiplier on the battlefield. As the king stood poised to cross the channel, a chilling intimacy emerged: the Southampton plot. A conspiracy led by 3 high-ranking noblemen, including Richard, Earl of Cambridge, aimed to assassinate Henry and replace him with a distant cousin, Edmund Mortimer, before the fleet could even sail. The plot was discovered at the last minute. The 3 men were arrested, tried, and summarily executed. The act demonstrated Henry's terrifying resolve. He was a king who would not hesitate. Treason was met with swift, unsparing justice, proving to his assembled forces that the only loyalty they needed was to him. With the internal threat purged, on August 11, 1415, the king and his army embarked for France.
End the war in one stroke. For weeks, the English army was shadowed by French scouts. Their only hope of crossing the major rivers, the Somme and the Ternoise, was continually frustrated by French forces guarding every viable bridge and ford. Henry was forced further and further inland, his supply lines stretched, his men losing hope. At one point, the army was forced to march south, away from Calais, in a desperate search for a crossing. It was a moment of true peril, where Henry's leadership shone brightest. He held daily masses, personally oversaw the sick, and spoke to his troops not of victory, but of endurance and faith. His soldiers, cold, hungry, and sick, began to see him not as a distant king, but as a resolute companion in suffering. Finally, after a perilous flanking maneuver, Henry found an undefended ford on the Somme and managed to cross the river. The trap was sprung, but the French had been wrong-footed. Henry turned his army north, putting a smaller river, the Ternoise, and the vast, muddy fields of northern France between his exhausted men and the pursuing French juggernaut. On October 24, 1415, near the village of Azincourt, which the English would pronounce as Agincourt, the English army finally came to face with the French host. V. Agincourt. The Day of the Longbow. The night before the battle was a study in contrasts. The French camp, enormous and supremely confident, was a cacophony of noise, drunken revelry, boastful challenges, and the clatter of weapons being polished for the easy win they expected on the morrow. The English camp, huddled between 2 thick woods, was silent. Henry ordered the priests to hold confessions, knowing that many would not see the sunrise. He walked among his men, a cloak pulled tight against the freezing rain, his face grim but resolute. He forbade any talk of surrender or rescue. He was one of them, a man facing overwhelming odds, relying only on God and the courage of his fellow Englishmen. The morning of October 25th, St. Crispin's Day, dawned cold, damp, and muddy. The French army, numbering perhaps 25,000 to 30,000 men, was arrayed across the field, their noblemen encased in gleaming heavy plate armor. The English, a mere 6,000, stood opposite, their longbowmen protected only by leather jackets, their only defense the forest on either flank, and their king's brilliant tactical placement. Henry V had chosen his battlefield perfectly. The open ground between the two woods was only 1,000 yards wide. This narrow choke point prevented the massive French army from using its superior numbers to envelop the English flanks. The overnight rain had churned the newly plowed field into a thick, clinging mud, a treacherous obstacle for the heavily armored French cavalry and infantry. For hours, neither side moved. Henry knew he could not wait for the French to starve him out. Around 11 a.m., he delivered the iconic, rousing order, "Banners, advance!" The English army moved forward a few hundred yards and halted. The longbowmen drove 6-foot wooden stakes into the ground, angling them outward, a lethal, improvised barrier against a cavalry charge. The French, insulted by the English advance, finally moved. The first charge came from the French cavalry. They were instantly thrown into chaos. Their horses, panicked by the long, sharp stakes and slowed by the mud, became tangled in their own lines. Then came the second phase, the longbow storm. The English archers unleashed a barrage of arrows so dense and fast that the sky reportedly darkened. These were not bolts designed to pierce the thick armor of the noblemen, but to strike the unprotected horses and the exposed faces, armpits, and leg joints of the charging men-at-arms. The sheer volume of fire was devastating. The leading ranks of French knights, unable to retreat due to the pressure of the thousands behind them, began to pile up in the deep mud. The ground, already churned by the cavalry, became a horrific morass of falling horses, struggling men, and razor-sharp arrows. When the French men-at-arms finally slogged into contact with the English line, they were already exhausted. Their armor, designed for tournament combat, not a slog through thick mud, was a fatal burden. The English men-at-arms, lighter and more mobile, fought with a desperate ferocity. The battle lasted only a few hours. The French forces, riddled by the longbows and suffocated by the narrow, muddy terrain, broke into rout. The noblemen who made it to the English line were quickly overwhelmed. In the midst of the battle, Henry V fought on foot, taking an axe blow to his ceremonial crown. The slaughter was catastrophic. By dusk, over 6,000 French noblemen lay dead, including the Constable of France, 3 dukes, and 90 barons. The English lost fewer than 600 men. The tennis balls had been answered with a deluge of arrows.
For finding the anomalies that betray the presence of a wreck. Once a target is found, a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, confirms the find with high-definition cameras. The resulting images often show haunting scenes of mastheads still standing and human artifacts perfectly preserved in the cold water. Chapter 10. The Ethical Battle for the Dead. Every lost ship on the Great Lakes is a mass grave. Due to the cold temperatures, decomposition is incredibly slow, meaning many human remains are still within the wrecks. For famous wrecks like the Edmund Fitzgerald, the legal and ethical consensus is clear. The wreck is designated a sacred memorial and burial site, with strict non-disturbance zones enforced. This principle collides with the tradition of maritime salvage law and shipwreck tourism. Many states claim ownership of historic wrecks to protect them from commercial salvators. While recreational diving is allowed on accessible wrecks, a strict ethic of non-removal is enforced. The ongoing debate centers on how a modern nation chooses to honor its dead and preserve the fragile, deep-water history that underpinned its rise. Part 5. The Oldest Ghost and the Curse of the Inland Empire. Chapter 11. The Impossible Dream of the Le Griffin. To understand the lake's graveyard, one must journey back to 1679 and the loss of the bark Le Griffin.
She was the project of René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, and the first full-size sailing ship on the upper Great Lakes. Built above Niagara Falls, the Griffin was a declaration of French dominance, intended to secure the lucrative fur trade. On September 18, 1679, after loading a priceless cargo of furs, she sailed eastward into Lake Michigan, bound for Niagara. She was never seen again. Chapter 12. The Curse and the Century of Rumors. The disappearance of the Le Griffin was the first great maritime mystery of the lakes. Rumors ranged from a sudden fatal storm to crew mutiny. The most popular theory centers on the curse, claiming the ship was doomed due to La Salle's arrogance and pride. Finding her would be the discovery of the holy grail of Great Lakes wrecks, the physical starting point of American history in the interior. Chapter 13. The Modern Gold Rush. Dozens of expeditions have claimed to find the Le Griffin, all proven wrong. The search has become a high-stakes obsession, often leading to legal and historical disputes over salvage rights. The enduring mystery of the Le Griffin underscores that the inland oceans of North America are an indifferent force that transforms historical fact into an enduring, compelling legend. Part 6. The Keepers of the Shore and the Breakers of the Waves. Chapter 14. The Birth of the U.S. Life-Saving Service. The immense loss of life eventually led to the formation of the U.S. Life-Saving Service in 1878. These surfmen, the precursors to the modern Coast Guard, followed the simple heroic motto, "You have to go out, but you don't have to come back." Their primary tools were the surf boat, a heavy craft rowed through crashing waves, and the Lyle gun, a small cannon used to fire a line to a ship, allowing the crew to be hauled to safety via a breeches buoy. Chapter 15. The Impossible Rescue of the Nelson Crew, 1899. The heroism of the U.S. Life-Saving Service is captured by the rescue of the schooner barge D.M. Nelson crew in a brutal 1899 gale on Lake Superior. After the Lyle gun failed, Keeper Captain Henry Cleary and his men attempted to launch the surf boat 5 times, eventually reaching the sinking vessel and rescuing all 7 men, a stunning feat of endurance and courage that earned them the Gold Life-Saving Medal. Chapter 16. The Sioux Locks, the Heart of the Beast. The entire economic efficiency of the Great Lakes hinges on the Sioux Locks, located between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. This system manages a 21-foot elevation difference and became the busiest single system of artificial waterways in the world during its industrial peak. Virtually every ton of iron ore, copper, and grain that built the industrial U.S. had to pass through these locks. This reliance created immense economic pressure, forcing captains to push their vessels harder in a final frantic rush, the race to the Sioux, which was historically responsible for an outsized number of late-season sinkings. The Sioux Locks are the physical manifestation of the unrelenting economic forces that created the Great Lakes Graveyard, destabilized the Acolytes' protective shield, while deploying crude portable arcane batteries to create a geometric counter-frequency. The resulting combined energy caused the black crystal core to implode geometrically. The invisible metaphysical shockwave caused absolute chaos in the British command, leading to the surrender of Burgoyne's entire army. The victory was one of resonance over geometry. Chapter 9. Franklin and the Arcane Battery. Fall 1780. Paris, Kingdom of France. Benjamin Franklin completed the construction of the massive Arcane Battery beneath a vineyard near Passy. It was a colossal machine of copper, quartz, and magnetite, designed to generate a targeted, massive surge of static energy of liberty, a precise electrical dissonance. The machine was disassembled and loaded onto a fast frigate, the Silence, captained by Elias Thorne, a high-ranking cartographer. They sailed the neutral path, a forgotten ley-line route, to avoid the Enclave's dimensional detection. The fate of the American dimension was aboard that ship. Chapter 10. The Prime Geometrist's Final Design. Summer 1781. Yorktown, Virginia. Washington's intelligence confirmed that General Cornwallis's frantic engineering at Yorktown was the work of the prime geometrist, the Enclave's terrifying master. Yorktown was a unique confluence of three major ley lines, a perfect nexus for the largest structure yet, a five-sided dimensional nexus based on non-Euclidean geometry. Alastair sent a final cryptic warning: attack the fifth bastion. It is where the prime geometrist will attempt the synchronization ritual. The news that the Silence had arrived confirmed Washington's plan. The conventional army would conduct a siege against Cornwallis, while the Keystone Guard would execute a parallel secret geometric assault on the fifth bastion using the arcane battery. The assault on the fifth bastion. October 14th, 1781. Yorktown, Virginia. The famous historical assault on redoubts 9 and 10 was merely a diversion. The arcane battery was deployed near the fifth bastion, which was surrounded by a shimmering violet light, the activation of the dimensional nexus. Major Talmadge led the Keystone Guard into a brutal, terrifying fight against the Black Iron acolytes. Talmadge reached the central blockhouse where the prime geometrist was presiding over the massive, swirling nexus core, preparing to use his silver staff to complete the synchronization ritual. Ignoring the geometrist, Talmadge plunged the original Obsidian Shard, the largest piece of the 1945 Keystone, into the nexus control panel. The shard caused an immediate dimensional short circuit. The prime geometrist shrieked in pure mathematical horror as his form dissolved. The nexus core collapsed inward, and the bastion crumbled. Washington saw a silent flash of blinding violet light. The war for the geometry of America was over. Chapter 12. The Covenant of Sovereignty. Epilogue. 1787. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The United States was a free nation, its true history known only to a handful. As the Constitutional Convention convened, Washington, Franklin, and Madison drafted the secret covenant of sovereignty. The system of checks and balances was created not just to prevent human tyranny, but to ensure that no single point in the political or geographic architecture could ever be controlled by the Black Iron Enclave. The Bill of Rights was designed to guard against geometric thought subjugation. The dismantled arcane battery was integrated into the White House and the Washington Monument to serve as a permanent dormant anti-resonance field. The original Obsidian Shard was sealed in a vault beneath the Capitol building, guarded by a newly formed secretive intelligence agency. Washington knew the American experiment was a fragile singularity, requiring eternal vigilance. The story of the United States had begun, a nation founded on liberty, protected by the secret geometry of a war fought